right, I'll go ahead and get started, and folks will have a little bit of time to join before Mary's keynote. So welcome everyone to the second annual Arrow Rock Birds and Bees Festival. This is a festival that we started in 2019 in partnership with Experience Arrow Rock and other partners in the town of Arrow Rock, Missouri. It was originally started as, of course, an in-person festival event in the town of Arrow Rock, and it was in conjunction with the Arrow Rock Garden Market, which had been running for 15 or 16 years in 2019. And then in 2020, of course, like many of everyone's things, it was completely canceled. And so this year, when we started planning it in January of 2021, we weren't exactly sure where things were going to be at. And so we wanted to do this hybrid format. And it seems to be working out quite well because people can join from everywhere. And so we have 3 days of presentations, and then we are doing some small in-person events, some activities in Arrow Rock this coming Saturday, if it doesn't rain. And so one thing that's been really, really neat about having this in this hybrid format and being able to deliver these programs to you virtually is we have been able to get speakers from all across Missouri and all across the country, which is really cool. And so if we didn't have this opportunity to deliver this virtually, I don't think that we could have such a large geography represented. So there's a few things during my just very small part of this welcome that I wanted to tell you about to make sure that you know to get sort of the best experience that you can from the festival here. So this is what your festival platform looks like if you are on a desktop or laptop computer. And I just wanted to point a couple things out. So here on the left-hand side, if you are watching us right now, you have found the agenda. But I wanted to point out some of the other things in here. So there's community space where you can just kind of chat with other attendees. And some people are doing meetups where you hook up on a video chat, messages. Please do check out our sponsors and exhibitors. I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about them in a minute. And then you can see some other resources here. And so things like documents where there are handouts and all these other buttons that you see. So try and check those out if you have a chance. So that's a desktop or laptop version. If you are on a phone or a tablet, it's going to look something like this or very, very similar to this. And that's where those buttons are on a mobile device, just so you know. So you just click these buttons and you get to see all kinds of different things. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And in addition to thanking all of our excellent presenters that are all, volunteering their time and expertise, we have more than 20 presentations this week, and it's been wonderful so far. All of those presentations, just so everyone knows, they are being recorded. We're trying to get them up on the Whova app. I don't know about in real time, but hopefully towards the end of each day. And everyone that has registered for the festival will also receive an email with a link to a YouTube channel where you can view all of the recordings of all of the presentations from this weekend. I absolutely want to thank our festival sponsors. We have a lot of great organizations that have sponsored the Birds and Bees Festival this year, including the organization of our keynote speaker this evening. Mary is of the National Wildlife Federation. And I encourage you to check out both their websites, the organizations that have sponsored, and also our exhibitors. So a lot of our exhibitors have put up different videos. They have handouts. A lot of them are nonprofit organizations with informational handouts, as well as having, brochures of nature-related products in some cases. Some of you, I'm sure, got to visit with Tracy of So Wild Natives. Today, she had open office hours in her virtual booth, and I wanted to tell everyone that Pheasants Forever, Quail Forever is going to have live office hours at their booth tomorrow morning at 10:30. And so I believe they're doing some kind of cool giveaway as well. Also tomorrow, in addition to all of the presentations all day, We have a happy hour and interactive game. It is the brainchild of our education coordinator from my organization, Paige Whittick. So she's gonna be leading the game. It should be a lot of fun. And that is followed by our next keynote, which is Scott Black of Xerxes Society. So that's tomorrow. Just a couple other things to point out. We have a scavenger hunt. That's one of those buttons I just showed you on the last screen. So basically the scavenger hunt can be done in Arrow Rock if you're in our mid-Missouri area, or you can do it wherever you are. And I mean, anywhere in the country, it doesn't matter. They're just, you're sort of sent out to look for certain nature-related items. You know, it could be something like a native flower. So you're asked to find 10 things out in nature, you submit those, and we have really cool prizes. We have, for kids in each category, Arrow Rock and anywhere else. For kids that enter, we'll have a drawing for Athlon binoculars, some really high quality binoculars from one of our sponsors. For families, we have bird feeders to give away as prizes. And for adults, we have bird friendly coffee from Birds and Beans Coffee. So Arrow Rock or somewhere else, and 3 different categories within each of those. So please get out and try and enjoy the scavenger hunt. And the last thing I wanted to tell you about in regards to you can surf around virtually is we do have a raffle going on. A lot of folks bought raffle tickets when they registered. So that's a really cool package for 4 people in Arrow Rock. It's lodging, dining, a tour, and a show at our theater. And so lastly, I would just really like to encourage folks, even if you don't win the raffle, to come visit us in Arrow Rock. It's a wonderful town. We're a state historic site. We're a national historic site. It's really a cultural gem here in pretty much the very center of Missouri. We have great migration, great bird watching during migration. We're right on a national wildlife refuge, part of the Big Muddy refuge system. And so if you want to check out a little bit more about that, I know that our exhibitor and sponsor, Experience Arrow Rock, they have a video that's kind of just like a drone view of the town and the surrounds, and I highly recommend checking that out. I think it's like 3 minutes, and it'll give you a really good idea of Arrow Rock and what it looks like. So with that, welcome. I hope you enjoyed tonight's program, and of course the rest of the festival as well. And I am pleased to have with me my friend and colleague, state ornithologist Sarah Kendrick.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Dana. I was asked to welcome everyone to Missouri. So welcome everyone to Missouri virtually. I know many of you are here in Missouri, but that many may be tuning in from beyond our state's borders. So welcome to everyone. If you're not from Missouri, you know about Missouri's, or if you're from Missouri, you know about Missouri's beauty and diversity of habitats, but others may not. I think a lot of people who've never been to Missouri kind of write it off, or they think it's a cornfield, but this state is a beauty, and everyone who lives here knows that. So habitat-wise, Missouri boasts 5 ecoregions, which are just ecosystem classifications in the state. We have 3 prairie or grassland ecoregions in the northwest and in our boot heel, different types, and our Ozark Highlands across most of the southern half of the state. We have 2 major rivers, of course, the Missouri and the Mississippi, which bisect us and go down the eastern border, which guide a massive migratory bird flyway down the center of the continent. We have multiple man-made impoundments or lakes in the state, and miles of clear spring-fed Ozark streams, all of which provide even more diverse aquatic habitats. Each part of the state is varied and diverse and provides habitat for about 70 species of mammal, about 335 bird species in an average year, not to mention native plants, insects, herbs, fish, and aquatic organisms that call Missouri home, among many other things I'm sure I did not mention. Our conservation history in Missouri is special too. It's in the 20s and the 30s, when wildlife, forest, and fish resources had almost been depleted. Citizens led the effort to create a bipartisan conservation commission to get to work to get politics out of conservation. And in the 1970s, our citizens again stepped up and led the effort to create a conservation sales tax to be allocated to the conservation department to keep our resources healthy and sustainable, because they knew the value in that. Only a few states have this system, both systems, by the nonpartisan commission as well as the sales tax. So we're very blessed. We're also blessed in Missouri to have a diversity of conservation partners, as evidenced by this festival. Our host for this Birds and Bees Festival is the Missouri River Bird Observatory, who in the last 10 years have initiated amazing education, data gathering, and fieldwork, and brought together many partners through events like this very one. We also have many other NGOs in the state who contribute to conservation, and I'm only aware mostly of the bird ones. There are many, many others. Together, we form a strong, strong network of conservation partners who work hard every day to keep our resources sustainable. But we have some real threats. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, although there's a lot to be grateful for in the state. But there are real threats to these resources we love. Again, I'm most keenly aware of the bird world, and we're experiencing some major bird declines. 29% of North American avifauna are gone since 1970. We have to band together to make a difference for these species. We have to, or else, right? Our conservation network is strong, but we can't slow these declines without our public. We need the education, we need the public's engagement, we need the public's interest and willingness to change, to make small changes that have big impacts if we all do them together to keep our resources sustainable and slow these declines, not only of birds, but many other species. So we are learning about many ways to help and contribute to conservation at this Birds and Bees Festival sessions. And that includes our keynote speaker tonight. So Mary Phillips, who's the head of Garden for Wildlife at the National Wildlife Federation, will speak to us now on a super important topic, wildlife habitat in your backyard. So Mary, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Dana and Sarah. Really, really excited to be here. Excited because Missouri has been one of my favorite states to work with folks, just amazing. We have a great connection here because we're connected by the fact that the Missouri River Bird Observatory is one of the members of the Federation of the Conservation Federation of Missouri, which is one of our members nationally, one of our state affiliates. So we've got a nice synergy here. So I'm really excited to jump in, and I'm gonna talk a little bit kind of at a high level, kind of like the drone Sarah was talking about, of what's going on nationally a little bit in this space of creating wildlife habitat, and then bring it down to kind of the meat of what the actual components of wildlife habitat, and then also what you can do in Missouri and some really great examples of work I know about that you're doing in Missouri. So lots of shout outs to folks as well. Lots of great people that I hope will be seeing this as well. So I'm gonna pull up my slide deck here and get started. So as Sarah mentioned, let me just, Dana, can you give me a shake of your head that you can see that, or tell me?
It looks great. Yep.
Okay, great, good. So a little bit about myself. So I've been working with National Wildlife Federation since 2014, and I love that Sarah was talking about the citizen engagement and how important that was in the kind of founding conservation work in Missouri. Well, that's really all about what my job is really helping individuals know what they can do to create habitat where they live, work, play, learn, and worship. And since 2014, we've expanded that effort to really include 25 of our active state affiliates, the Conservation Federation of Missouri being one of those. My day-to-day job is I'm providing strategic vision and operations management for all of our Garden for Wildlife nationwide. And I've also been really involved in initiating different species campaigns with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on monarch recovery, the White House on pollinators, and co-founded the National Pollinator Garden Network and the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. I am a certified master naturalist as well. And prior to coming to National Wildlife Federation, I had founded a small business called The Abundant Backyard, where I did conservation landscaping consultation, and also from a more strategic level, I had for about 2 decades led a nonprofit management consultant firm. So that's my background. And we're gonna move into, this is the fun part. I want you guys to remember, I have a trivia question. How many caterpillars or insects does a pair of chickadee parents need to raise one nest or clutch of its babies? And we will have the answer at the end. You can't answer if you are a wildlife biologist. this happened on my last call. The wildlife biologist knew, and this is for the general folks. So we'll move into that later. One thing that is important just to let you know, our mission at National Wildlife Federation is to unite all Americans to ensure that wildlife thrive in a rapidly changing world. And Sarah was really talking about some of the statistics and the decline. We also, in Missouri, we released a report a couple years ago. Really, it's about 1/3 of North American wildlife that's in decline. And I'll reference some other statistics on that, but that is really why we're here and why this is so critical that we all work together. Again, I think probably speaking a little bit to the choir here, but important to remind. So Garden for Wildlife, we founded this in 1973. Our amazing naturalist Craig Tufts founded this, and then his work was later continued and is still continued in partnership with David Mizejewski, who's our other lead naturalist now at the organization. This has been an amazing program. In 1973, I think we had like 100 certified wildlife habitats. That's our signature program, which I'll be talking about in a minute. And you'll see the expansion of that over these last 5 decades. It's really been amazing because so many people have embraced this. So our mission right now is to make it easy and seamless for people to connect what they plant to the positive impact on wildlife and people and the planet. And we're really trying to revolutionize the way people garden and landscape with eco-friendly practices to provide those benefits. This is what I was mentioning, our Certified Wildlife Habitat Program. That is where people commit to providing food, water, cover, and places to raise young, and really putting in those sustainable gardening practices. As of last year, in December, we hit, well, it was November, 255,000 certified wildlife habitats nationwide. We hit 260,000 just last week. So really excited. We doubled last year what we had done in 2019 because so many people are really realizing how important this is. And also, I do have to say, they were home. They could do it. So we know that played into it as well. But they came to us. It was really amazing. And we are at that same pace this year. So we're very excited about people's commitment to this. Again, we've touched on this a little bit. It's kind of a 3-part story that we're addressing. We all know wildlife is rapidly disappearing as the climate crisis escalates and other factors. We also know wildlife thrives in areas with native plants. One of the roles of Garden for Wildlife is to help people see and how they can connect to finding the right plants for the right place. And native plants are not available at scale to meet the kind of demand and actually, address this rapid change. So that's one of the things we're looking at nationally is how can we ramp up and support the whole native plant marketplace to provide more natives nationwide. And I'll be sharing a little bit of that towards the end of the presentation. So as we know, one of the other reasons wildlife habitat is lost is because of our development at a pace of 1 million acres a year nationwide. We know that the monarch butterfly nationwide is declining and its milkweed has declined. We also know that in these developed areas, lawns are using billions of gallons of water and they are not sequestering carbon at the rate that trees and native plants can do. And of course, there's also the chemical impact of the development. So one of the things that I mentioned before, we're really encouraging people to garden with the thought of putting in food, water, cover, and places for young to raise their young. And one of the things we've also seen, and we've been able to work with third-party researchers, is that the yards that actually put in these components, use native plants, use sustainable gardening practices, they can actually be tracked and studied that you're at least getting 2 times, you're doubling the amount of wildlife in that property. Again, the more diverse and robust that wildlife habitat is, you can actually increase those amounts even more. But that's kind of a baseline that we've been able to track. And that's versus yards that have traditional ornamental plants and are lawn heavy. So that's really the difference. And as obviously many of you birders know, songbird babies rely on thousands of caterpillars and other insects that really can only be supplied by many, many native plants because they have this co-evolved relationship. The other thing, and this is the Birds and Bees conference, and I am going to talk about our native bees and particularly our pollen specialist bees. Roughly 30% of native bee species are pollen specialists, and that means they restrict their diets to specific native plants. It's actually really fascinating that when studying some of these bees, their body shape actually is coincides or has been designed to actually kind of fit into the parts, the reproductive parts of certain flowers, and they can only really get certain types of pollen from certain types of flower, and they've co-evolved. They're dependent on each other's survival for that. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we have these specific plants that help not only the bees, the native bees, the pollen specialists, but also specific types, very similar with caterpillars of butterflies and moths. The other thing that people don't necessarily realize, and this is something we're doing more, getting more research on as well, is native plants. I mean, we do know they sequester carbon. They use less water, and their roots also help with stormwater runoff to help maintain healthy watersheds. So they really are amazing, and they are the core of Garden for Wildlife and certified wildlife habitats. One example, though, also just as we, and I'll show some examples later, is that we are going to talk about these species that support significant numbers of wildlife. And oaks are an example that they actually support over 500 species of butterflies and moths and they also, of course, feed and shelter other types of wildlife. So our mantra is really obviously to garden for wildlife, but to plant with purpose. And we've been talking about planting more because not everyone identifies themselves as a gardener. So we're really trying to get people to understand that whatever they plant, they actually have a power to make a difference. So we're helping people understand that it's not only wildlife that benefits, it's people. You're bringing nature home, you're getting outdoors in a wildlife habitat right where you live. And then there's all the planet bonuses and benefits as well that I mentioned just on the last slide. And I think the other really key thing that we're talking about is native plants are core to Garden for Wildlife, but we're going to be talking about these keystone native plants. And keystone native plants, and you'll hear more of that as well on the closing session of this conference by Dr. Doug Tallamy, who we work closely with. Keystone plants for butterflies and moths, there are specific plants that actually help about 90% high numbers of butterflies and moth caterpillars. And for the bee pollen specialists, it's similar. There are keystone native plants that help about 60% of these pollen bee specialists. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more later. And then with all of that, because of the fact that 96% of backyard birds rely on caterpillars hosted by these native plants, you're really helping the entire food chain there. So that's something that we're really trying to help the general public understand when they're purchasing plants, that they can make this really powerful impact by the plants that they select. So one thing that's really exciting, and Missouri's in good company because there's so many people in Missouri planting for birds, bees, and other wildlife. But what we're seeing, and we partnered with the National Garden Association to really track and be part of their 20-year gardening trends survey. We're seeing people all over really realizing that they can make a difference. And just last year, as we mentioned, due to the pandemic, there was a 42% of increased gardening. And 88% of those gardeners intend to increase or maintain the level of gardening in 2021. Those are the people we're trying to get at and help them understand that as they're being introduced and starting gardening or increasing their gardening, they can do it in a way that really makes a difference. So these are some of the categories of people that have really, obviously backyard birders, but many other people are now connecting their lifestyle and what they do to what they plant. And that's something that is part of our Garden for Wildlife focus. Here, we also had some other statistics. One of the other really exciting things is that over 67 million Americans actually purchased a plant because they knew it was going to help a butterfly, bee, or bird. And then 43.5 million actually purchased plants, a specific plant, because they knew it was native to their area. And great programs like Missouri's Grow Native is an example of getting the resources to people in their area, the native plants they need. So really excited, and we love Grow Native, and excited about what you guys do for Missouri, but you're part of those numbers and helping support those numbers. And then the other statistics we found is that over 30 million adults are converting part of their lawn to natural or wild flower landscape. And what was really interesting is that the respondents who, with children in their household, and those in the 35 to 44-year-old age group were actually more likely last year to convert a part of their lawn to natural or wildflower landscape. So I like to share that with folks because I think those are trends that you can look at in your state. And if you're part of the volunteer that's trying to get more people to do some of this kind of planting and create wildlife habitat, it's good to know those motivations and see who's doing it and kind of key into that where you live. So appreciation, again, as I mentioned, for Missouri, the Conservation Federation of Missouri is one of the 25 state affiliates of National Wildlife Federation that actually really promotes creating certified wildlife habitat. So in Missouri, you can go to their site, and when you look and want to apply to become a certified wildlife habitat, they will get a share of the application fee. That it's a processing fee that we do charge just so that we can process it, get out your certificate and all those things. But the great thing is the Conservation Federation of Missouri will get a share in that to help create and do more of their habitat program, workshops, and so forth. I mentioned here the Missouri Botanic Garden. We were really excited to come out and dedicate their children's garden in 2019 to be a certified wildlife habitat. So this is a little bit of my shout outs to the Show Me State that has really showed us how much you love wildlife. So I've been mentioning the certified wildlife habitats. There's over 3,000 throughout the state of Missouri, spanning 462 towns and cities. And these are some of the top cities that have really kind of rocked it in the certified wildlife habitat space. And I do want to call out Chesterfield, Missouri. That has also been designated a community wildlife habitat because based on their population, they have the highest percentage of certified wildlife habitats in their state, in their community. And I just want to do a shout out to Darcy, who's been strong. They've been around for about 10 years, just really doing amazing workshops and all sorts of really exciting stuff. We're hoping to expand those throughout the state of Missouri. So if anyone is interested in leading the charge in your state, we do have a whole group that helps communities become community wildlife habitats. So you can reach out to me after if you're a volunteer or a leader in your community that's interested in doing that. And the other thing I mentioned earlier that I was really involved with the Million Pollinator Garden Challenge. In 4 years, we were able to register over 1 million pollinator gardens across the United States. And St. Louis and also a lot of other cities in Missouri really did concentrated numbers of pollinator gardens. And these are just an example in the St. Louis area of some of the activity and the groups that really rocked it out of the park. So I'm going to get into more of the science around certified wildlife habitats and the components. As we mentioned earlier, insects are a critical level of the food web. As we also mentioned, 90% of the insects that rely on plants can only survive on those plants with which they co-evolved. The bee pollen specialists are an example of that. The monarch caterpillar is also another example in its relationship with milkweed. I think Missouri being in the flyway, most people know about monarch decline and that really important relationship and why milkweed is so important to the monarch caterpillar. For those that don't know, it's the leaves of the milkweed plant that the caterpillar feeds on. It provides toxins to them that predators do not like. So it's key to their survival. And that's why they only lay their eggs, monarchs, on milkweed plants. And of course, they need to be the native milkweed plants to your ecoregion. So as I mentioned, this is important and it includes all ecosystems, urban, suburban, and rural. And again, I started to talk a little bit about native plants. I'm going to go a little more deeply about the benefits of native plants. So I mentioned before, the deep-rooted prairie grasses and forbs herbaceous perennials, there's a study that found them to sequester as much as 1/3 of a ton of carbon per acre per year. And as you can see in this slide, these amazing root systems are part of that. They're also amazing because as they grow and dry up and then expand, they've created all these channels in the soil. And those channels are amazing for stormwater runoff and not leaving that, pollution and other stuff just setting at the surface. It's able to absorb it and then as also sequester the carbon in that process. As I mentioned, the stormwater runoff, again, the channels, this is another shot of how that works for the different size plants. The really key thing that in wildlife gardens and creating wildlife habitat is to look at trying to layer your planting so that there's density above and below the ground, because this underground root layer can play such an important role in managing water and runoff, but also create a fertile soil layer as well. So again, talking about layering, when you're creating a wildlife habitat, it's really great to have structural plants that provide the shelter food sources for birds and insects, as well as for winter structuring, framing, shading, and screening. And then of course, the colorful flowering plants that are providing nectar and pollen, but also provide a great atmosphere and scents, fragrance for adults, people as well. The ground cover plants are really key. They also provide additional pollen sources. They really help in weed suppression and erosion control. And then of course, there's the filler plants that are kind of the medium-sized ones that you want to put in. Many of them are seed providers and they create a great native seed bank for the future of your wildlife garden. One thing is important, especially with those ground cover plants or the low growing plants, they actually can act as a green mulch versus just layering in the hardwood mulch. They actually can provide also food for insects, and the roots contribute to the biodiversity underground. That's a really healthy way to keep out weeds and let them kind of take over a little bit in between your larger structural plants. And it's extremely beneficial to wildlife. As we mentioned, wildlife needs native plants. And that's one of the reasons people sometimes say, why are we calling this garden for wildlife? Well, this act of planting is really in purpose. It's the definition of gardening. So everyone loves birds, bees, and butterflies. And we're going to go a little bit into the fact that they're all interrelated. What we do for the bees and butterflies also help the other in creating a wildlife habitat garden. Also create the places for other wildlife that are important and need habitat as well. So our mammals and amphibians and others. Even wildlife that might be a little scary, they all have a place and an important part. And many times, left alone, they're not really all that scary. And then other things that I do want to talk about, some people in wildlife habitat, it does attract, some wildlife that people consider is a nuisance. But those are all also important parts of our ecosystem. And there are certain plants, particularly with deer, some are deer resistant or, can limit the deer engagement, especially if you use a lot of fragrant native plants, so forth. And of course, you will attract some predators. So that is all part of the wildlife habitat. But again, if you're having a good balance and you're trying to create that good balance in your wildlife garden, again, it balances out that relationship. And of course, people too. So as I mentioned, all wildlife need 4 things to survive: the food, water, cover, and places to raise young. And I'm going to go in depth on each of these right now. And doing a little time check there. So I mentioned the certified wildlife habitat. When you actually grow a garden and you have the food, water, cover, and places to raise young, and you've committed to sustainable practices you can certify with National Wildlife Federation and create a certified wildlife habitat. And we have, this is one example of one of our signs. So the food for wildlife. Food comes in many forms, obviously berries, seed. Ideally in a wildlife garden, what you can give wildlife from plants is ideal, but in seasons where there is not an abundance of bloom or berries or seed, you can supplement as well with birdseed. Here's some other examples of the different types of plants that are so critical to providing food for a variety of wildlife. Obviously, the sunflower seeds, the pine cones, and the various berries. And again, this is an example of the nectar and pollen needs of bees and butterflies, which are also critical food. Again, more of that example with this, these two, the moth and the hummingbird. And the other kind of food too, of course, is insects for birds, and the ability to provide a variety of settings where those insects can thrive and beneficial insects can thrive for the bird population. And there's another example of that. As I mentioned, 96% of backyard birds rely on these invertebrate insects to feed their young. So it's a really critical piece. And I think that's part of the public messaging that is really sometimes hard for people to understand, because insects aren't exciting or pretty. But that's part of what we're trying to do in our messaging and in our promotions. And I'll be getting that to a second. So mention the food again. And you can also do the supplemental feeders. Again, you really need to be careful with anything that's providing the sugary kind of substance for various wildlife, particularly certain birds, like with the hummingbird feeders. You don't want to really use that clear packet. You want to really use a natural sweetener or sugar water, but just be really careful about what you're providing in those containers. So yes, food can attract all sorts of fun folks. So you have to be careful. So one really important thing is if you are attracting wildlife that bird feeders, for example, can in certain areas where wildlife is very prevalent, like birds and raccoons, you really shouldn't have them out. So that is really the purpose of this slide, and really balancing. And again, with the native plants, you're going to be providing so many wildlife the food they need, and not always, obviously, you want to attract these, even though these guys are cute, you don't really want to be attracting them into your yard. It's amazing because you're not usually providing mammals, but in the case of certain bats, you are able to provide nectar and for them as well. These are just some other fun looks of our little captured squirrel here. So water is a really, really key component in the essential 4 elements of habitat. And there's a variety of ways you can provide water in your habitat. You can do something super fancy like this if you have the space and resources. But really, all animals need water to drink or bathe. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be a small area as well, like a small pool or pond area or a bird bath. Also, having places that collect natural rainwater are important. This is obviously in a pond, but the fact that there's certain leaves of certain plants that can collect water, and they're just there long enough for certain animals to feed on. Again, this is a pond, more elaborate, but just having areas of depressions in your property that can collect water for a short period of time can often be beneficial to wildlife. We have a whole section in our resources around creating various types of water sources, including making sure you can actually create these depressions to do seasonal vernal pools and things like that for wildlife to seasonally find water as well. And fountains or misters are a really great way to attract a lot of birds into your habitat. and you never know what kind of birds you're going to find. So these beautiful barred owls are would be an amazing treat if you were able to attract those into your yard. And again, even the tiniest of wildlife need water. So some of these dishes that you can put stones in, actually with just a little water, are a great easy solution for providing water throughout your wildlife habitat. And here's another example of a puddling dish that can be used by butterflies, bees, and others. The one important thing in doing this is to provide the rocks, because they do provide some minerals for various species, and it's not just the water, but having those minerals are really important as well. It's another fun example of that. One point about water is people always ask us about mosquitoes. And so what our tips are for that is really to, if you have a bird bath or any kind of standing water, is to really clean it and remove it weekly. So that's one thing that can prevent mosquitoes. If you do have a water garden or a pond area, you can use the mosquito dunks that are safe for wildlife. And that's one opportunity for that. And when we're done with this presentation, if you go to nwf.org/garden, we do have resources for each of these habitat elements, as well as different blogs and tips on each of these topics that I'm sharing with you tonight. And of course, little fun foray into the water there with these cute links. Cover for wildlife, that's really key. And cover can be provided in a variety of ways. Having dead logs in part or corner of your yard, or some other kinds that can actually, a lot of leaves or bushes can actually help wildlife hide, because both prey and predators need cover. And just, thickets, bushes of native shrubs, again, all provide essential cover. So having that diversity of texture and layering in your wildlife garden with shrubs and trees is essential, as well as dead wood. And also just the cover in a variety of grasses, and again, the layering provides so many different areas. If we were to listen quietly, if we were actually at this site, we would hear so much wildlife active and running around in this space, hidden in the cover, but thriving. Another example. And again, this red elf, which is a juvenile newt, is a fun picture. I really love this one because of it's just a beautiful picture. But it really shows you that you can be attracting by letting wood in a corner of your property kind of rot, and have some spaces for cover and shelter for various wildlife. You don't really know what you're going to get, so it's great. And here's some more examples of snags and also little wood piles. And then we also have the man-made ones, which we always like to share, our toad abode, which is a nice little thing. You can do this with your own pots, a cracked pot with a little hole in it. There's a variety of ways to offer these toads a home in your space. The other hot trend, which really is insect hotels, and these are great, but the one thing that we really do advise our caution on is to make sure that they're cleaned seasonally, and that you are they're to keep out disease, that you're not I guess letting them sit between seasons, I think is really important to check them. Not so much this butterfly house, we actually don't recommend that. It's really these more natural kinds of insect hotels that we recommend. And then for birds, of course, roosting boxes are very helpful. And then there's other places to raise young, which again, the role plants provide, again, structural places for nesting, and then Also little burrow areas, other areas within the ground cover that we talked about. Again, this all points back to the layering effort of your wildlife garden, to have the different textures and heights of plants for cover and places to raise young. And again, you can provide some artificial or man-made versions of that. Little fun pictures of folks with their young. The one thing I wanted to mention, this is what I was really talking about a few minutes ago, were these different kinds of bee boxes. So there's these tubes that are really ideal for mason bees, for example. These are things that do need to be checked and cleaned out each year so that disease does not pervade between seasons. You can do this, and we do have tips on our website for building a good and healthy bee box this way. This goes back to the need for insects to have the minerals from the soil, and having an example of this for both bees to puddle in and butterflies. This was kind of more of a mud version. Not only that, this can be used by certain bees to build their homes. Of course, another example. I wanted to really get into keystone plants. This is really essential for butterflies, moths, and the pollen specialist bees to raise their young. You know, as we mentioned, some species have special habitat requirements for their young that are totally different from their adult phase. And that's what we're going to get into now. And I have some examples, actually lists for the state of Missouri. So we've been working with Dr. Doug Tallamy and his research team at the University of Delaware. And he's going to do a much more involved presentation for your closing session. But this is, right now, this is an example of the list he's been putting together for us. We've been working at the ecoregion level 2 level with him, and he's been doing lists of all the different kinds of genera that actually support the highest number of Lepidoptera, which are butterflies and moths. And this is an example of the top 30 in Missouri that host really high numbers of these insects. So as you see, the majority of them, the highest, most superpower keystone plant are our trees. So as we mentioned before, the oak species can, in general, support up to 500 species. The particular species in Missouri support 429. And then you can go through this list and look at all the different types of trees and shrubs that support high numbers of butterflies and moths. And there's some perennials in here as well, flowering perennials. But if you notice over on the right side, the dogwood, which I believe the flowering dogwood is your state tree, that supports 94 different kinds of butterflies and moths. And so it's a really nice list to get started in creating a wildlife habitat. The hawthorn as well. I think the flowering hawthorn is your state flower. It's 127 Lepidoptera. So it'd be kind of neat to have a Missouri wildlife garden having those state trees and flowers, and then balanced with all these others. So this is for butterflies and moths. The other research that we are putting together, and we are releasing all this during Pollinator Week, all these different lists, because we're still putting them together, some of the research on this. But for Missouri, we do have those done. And so trying to move slide here. It's not working. Sorry, my cursor is not working. We mentioned the pollen specialist bees. So we've been working with pollinator conservationist Jared Fowler, who's done a really detailed, amazing job, and he's been working with Doug on this joint project to really look at what are the high numbers of pollen specialist bees that can visit certain genus of certain types of flowers. So in Missouri, these are really the high numbers: sunflower, Rudbeckia, black-eyed Susan, goldenrod. Those are like the top performers. Asters, of course, are also important. You can see these different examples here. But one of the other things, and you'll see some of these smaller numbers on the side, one thing with pollen specialist bees is that while we want flowers that support high numbers of bee diversity, we also want to look at those that are only supporting 1 or 2, because that means those particular species, I mean, that's all those pollen specialist bees can actually survive with. So it's really important to provide a real balance of diversity and abundance of flowers within your wildlife habitat. And we're putting together more and more tools that can educate people on this selection to create a really great diverse palette for wildlife in your wildlife habitat. One of those being is we just launched a new site, and we are working, we don't have plants for Missouri yet, but we are working nationwide with growers to create collections of native plants that actually show you exactly how many species you can support with a specific collection or combination of plants. So that's something that in the fall we will have for Missouri, but we were piloting it more on the East Coast for this spring. And not only that, we're going to be mapping these collections into where people plant them so we can start tracking the wildlife impact geographically. The other really important thing, which we partnered with Doug Tallamy on, is our native plant finder. And that is a tool that you can put your zip code in, and you can find actually which native plants support the highest numbers of butterflies and moths where you live. This database is based on, it has over 11,000 species of Lepidoptera and 3,500 plant genera. We then partnered with USDA in the creation of this, and the USDA plants database was merged with this so that you could get more specific local native species in each of these genus for where you live. So that has been extremely popular and a very well used tool that is available to you as well. Also love to hear your stories about what you're doing on social media. So these are our different platforms. We just launched an Instagram page. We have our Garden for Wildlife Facebook page, our Twitter, and we've also have Pinterest. So please share your experiences in your wildlife habitat garden photos on those platforms. This is the answer. If anyone wanted to or remembered, the question is how many Carolina chickadee parents have to catch and feed to their young to successfully raise one nest of babies. And it's between 6,000 and 9,000 insects. And that just underscores really what we talked about in the presentation earlier, that the volume and the diversity of native plants that actually are host plants for these insects are so critical to the entire food chain. And the other important thing here is they only hunt for those insects within a radius of around 150 feet of their nest. So again, if you want to track these birds and other varieties of birds, having that floral diversity that actually support these kinds of insect species is absolutely critical to your wildlife garden. So that is really what I have for you. I'm really excited about questions in the chat and would love to hear from you.
Mary, thank you so much. I actually have a certified wildlife habitat, but I just learned a heck of a lot from that. And folks, I didn't say this at the beginning, but please do feel free to put your questions in either the Whova Q&A or the Whova chat or the Zoom chat if you can access that. And we do have a question right now, which is it's regarding the process by which you get your wildlife garden certified. So if you could talk a little bit about that actual process. Thanks.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm actually going to just pull that up so you can see it right here. And you can do it two ways. You can go to this Conservation Federation of Missouri and go through their site. And the other thing I wanted to share with you, this is Garden for Wildlife Month. So that was really a plant question. I'm kidding, it wasn't. But let me just show you right now. So this is our website, and we are offering this nationwide. This is, you just go to nwf.org/garden or nwf.org/certify, And you can click here, and we are actually offering 20% off the processing fee when you buy a sign. So it's a great deal. We're going to offer that through June 30th. And the process is really the requirements here. So you're providing food, water, cover, and places to raise young. What you do is you go here. This is an online application. You'll put in this promo code Garden21, and you will click on this, and it'll take you through the various steps of confirming that you have all these elements of habitat: the food, water, cover, places to raise young, and sustainable gardening practices. If you're not sure about that, you can also go back to our page here. We have a checklist you can download prior to jumping into the online application. And it's a walkthrough. You can walk through your garden and look at for food. Do you have these elements? You only need a certain number of each of these elements to qualify for certification. But this is what this really helps you think through also in the planning and design of the elements you want to put into your wildlife garden. But this is a good checklist before you jump into the online application. It also really talks through which sustainable practices you can employ to qualify for certification. So there's lots of examples here. And then within the site itself, we have lots of detail for how you can do this in any of these drop downs. We have examples, stories. So cover, it tells you what brush and leaf shelter is, what tree and snags are, how to build a bat house, which is ironically, this is our biggest visited site on the website. We have had and when I say big, I mean like 60,000 people coming to this, and sometimes in a month we'll have 20,000. It's very popular. So these are all the components here. We also have a lot of information about what you can do, whether you're in a home, school, on a campus, a community, place of worship, and obviously in your state. And we have examples of real life wildlife habitat gardens. So lots of resources here on the site. Again, it's nwf.org/garden for the full site. Other questions?
We do have another great question here, Mary. Do you have any advice for those living within a homeowners association, an HOA, that might have restrictions on some of these elements of habitat?
I'm so glad you asked that question. We do, and we also are coming out in the next month with a guide for HOAs and municipalities to actually address some of those restrictions, and also examples of communities who've changed some of those restrictions and how they did it. So we're really excited about that. But in our resources section, we have all sorts of tips. And so for right now, we have one that is about neighbor-friendly wildlife gardening, which has been helpful for HOAs to share about what makes sense and why you're doing it. Signage is also really important, we found, in helping people understand why you have a property that is not a lot of lawn and a lot of ornamentals. So that is one way. But as I said, we will send out, and our community wildlife habitats are very adept, and they have lots of examples of how to work with HOAs. Let me go back to other questions. I was just going to share here our community wildlife habitats. This is the group of people. We have them all over the country, and they have really done a lot to support healthy, green, wildlife friendly communities. And this is who have really helped us create this guide based on their experiences, and they're all over the country. So any other questions?
Let's see. So there's a bit of a chat going on, Mary, in the Hoover Q&A.
About HOAs. I can't see the.
Oh no, not about HOAs. So someone has put in just so everyone knows, someone has put in the Whova Q&A portion a link to the website that you've been talking about. And Jeannie also asks, she couldn't quite see on I believe the social media platforms that you're referencing, is the Facebook group called Plant with Purpose. What is it?
Yeah,
What are
it's
the
called
social
Garden
media?
for Wildlife.
Garden for Wildlife. Okay. Is that true of all the social platforms?
All the platforms are Garden for Wildlife. Yep.
Okay, great, thanks. Karen has a comment here. Your concept about how certain plants may not host or provide pollen for pollinators but are very specialized is important. I can't wait till you come up with a plan for Missouri that specifies species.
Well, we do
that is
those
super
lists.
exciting.
The lists I shared, I need to coordinate with you, Dana, on how to share resources from this presentation, which I did not get a chance to put up before. We can put those lists in there, and those were specific plants. Let me just go back to those for a second and share that are specific to Missouri. So this would be part of your plan. I mean, this would be the essential core components of the plan, is to plant these. Let me just, this is the fun of Zoom, I have to share. So just, it's not letting me, sorry.
It is the fun of Zoom.
Yeah.
And what we can do too is Mary, if you'll email me, some links. There have been some, put in the chat, and there are some resources online already, but we can post to our community board a bunch of different links for folks.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I will send you those.
Perfect.
Keystone plant genera for Missouri for pollen specialist bees are this list here. So this would be key to your plan for creating a wildlife habitat that was very rich in supporting pollen specialist bees. The other one would be the other list for the Lepidoptera, which was by Doug Talmy, which was the previous one, which is that one. So I will share those lists with Dana so we can get them into the resources area.
Perfect. Another question just came in, Mary. Are bee boxes catered to specific bee species, and are there habitat requirements necessary for them to entice bees to something the size of your backyard?
Right. So bee boxes are primarily for those kind of builder bees. They're primarily for mason bees. I think it's some leaf cutters that use them as well. But the ideal situation is that I think it's 75% of most bees are solitary bees versus those that live in communities or hives, like our bumblebees or the non-native honeybee. And so you want to provide patches of dirt, areas in your property where they can burrow into the ground. And then the really important thing for the ones that use the bee boxes is, again, for all these bees, you need to have the right pollen and nectar for them to actually be enticed to be in your area so that they have the food they need to go into those specific bee boxes or the ground.
Let's see here. I will note that someone else put another link in the Whova Q&A to the Conservation Federation of Missouri, partnership with the Garden for Wildlife program for that page as well. So
yes,
we've got some resources flying around here.
Good, thank you. Yep. I can't see any of that chat though.
I know, I know.
Yeah, sorry.
Nope, and we'll just make sure that it all gets out there to everyone. Does anyone else have any more questions? Please don't hesitate to put them in. Paige says, thank you for this presentation, Mary. I'm really excited about the resources for HOAs because I get questions about that a lot.
That's great. Can you ask Paige what community she's in? She can put it in the chat.
So Paige is, she lives in Arrow Rock. She's our education coordinator.
Great. Oh, wonderful.
But she works all over the state on programs and does some programs on native plants. So probably gets questions from all kinds of geographies all over Missouri.
Well, that's good. So when this guide comes out, Paige, we'll make sure you get it so you can help distribute it.
See, I'm just checking all the various devices here to make sure I'm not missing anybody's questions or concepts or comments. We're all right. We're just getting some thanks.
Thank you,
Mary.
You're very welcome.
So that was great. That was very informative.
Thanks.
And if folks don't have any more questions right now, but please, I know that, you know, as I said, I just learned a ton from this. I'm sure everyone did too. Please keep questions coming. You can, you know, put them in the community board if you want to. You can actually message Mary. You can always email me and I can find out answers to things. So please, as you think about this topic, keep the questions coming. So
Absolutely.
Mary, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it and everything.
.org
Yes.
/garden. That's
Yep. nwf.org/garden. Absolutely.
right.
Very good.
Well,
the
thank
National
you for
Wildlife
having
Federation.
Me, and very excited for all the great work in Missouri. So thanks.
Very good. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Bye.